Waitress gave her lunch to a stranger. The next day, her restaurant was bought by a billionaire. It happened on one of those quiet afternoons that felt almost forgotten by the world. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets silver and steaming. Inside Miller's diner, the smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the faint sound of an old radio humming from the kitchen. Lena Harper was wiping down the counter for the third time that hour. It was habit more than necessity. Business had been slow lately, too slow, and her boss, Mr. Miller, had started talking about selling the place if things didn't turn around soon. When the bell above the door jingled, she looked up expecting another regular. Instead, she saw a man standing in the doorway, soaked, silent, and impossibly still. He looked out of place here, like a scene torn from another movie and dropped into her little diner. His coat was expensive, tailored, but his eyes told another story. They looked tired, empty. He hesitated before stepping inside, scanning the near-empty room before sitting at a corner booth by the window. Lena approached with her usual warmth. "You picked a good time to come in," she said with a smile. "We're quiet today." He didn't smile back. "Coffee," he said simply, his voice low, steady, but frayed at the edges. "Coming right up." As she poured his cup, she noticed the tremor in his hands when he reached for the sugar. Something about him didn't fit, not the perfect cut of his suit, not the way he carried himself like a man used to commanding rooms, yet now couldn't even meet her eyes. She slid the coffee across. "Rough day." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You could say that." "Well," she said softly, "at least you've got warmth and caffeine now. That's a start." He looked up then, and for the first time she saw something flicker behind those cold blue eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or disbelief that someone still cared enough to notice. Hours passed. Rain began again, tapping against the windows like an echo of his silence. He hadn't ordered anything else, and Lena could tell he hadn't eaten. So when her break came, she walked to his table holding her own lunch, a half sandwich and a small bowl of soup, and set it down in front of him. He frowned. "I didn't order that, I know," she said, "but it looks like you need it more than I do." He stared at the food for a moment, then at her. "You shouldn't waste your lunch on a stranger." "It's not wasting if it helps," she replied, smiling faintly. For a second, his jaw clenched, as if holding back something heavy, pride maybe. Then, quietly, he picked up the spoon. She sat across from him, chin resting on her palm. "You know," she said, "most people who come in here either talk too much or not at all. You're clearly the second type." His lips curved barely. "Maybe I'm just out of practice. Then maybe today's a good day to start again." He studied her, as if trying to understand what made her so calm, so effortlessly kind. "You really believe that? That every day can start over?" she asked. "Yeah, I have to." He didn't answer, but the faintest warmth touched his eyes. "Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people," she'd later say, her voice gentle and full of quiet conviction. "Because some stories aren't about miracles. They're about moments that quietly rewrite who we are." By the time he left, the rain had stopped again. He placed a few bills on the table, but when she reached for them, she realized it was far too much for a cup of coffee and a shared lunch. "Wait," she started. But he was already gone, disappearing into the street without looking back. That night, Lena stayed late, cleaning up after closing. She tried not to think about him, but something about that man lingered. The sadness in his eyes, the way he'd eaten in silence like it was the first real meal he'd had in days. She didn't know that across town, in a high-rise suite overlooking the city, that same man, Ethan Cole, one of the most powerful investors in the country, sat at his desk, staring at a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in a napkin. He'd carried it with him when he left. The board had forced him to sell a company that day, a company he'd built from nothing. Betrayed by the people he trusted most, he'd spent the morning surrounded by lawyers, vultures, and numbers that suddenly meant nothing. For the first time in years, he'd felt small, human, and then there was her. He looked down at the napkin she'd wrapped the food in. Her handwriting was scrawled along the edge. "Be kind to yourself today." He didn't know her name, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. The next morning, when Lena arrived at the diner, Mr. Miller was standing at the counter holding a letter. His expression was stunned. "Lena," he said slowly, "you're not going to believe this." "What is it?" He handed her the letter. It was embossed with gold trim and signed at the bottom in thick black ink. It read, "Effective immediately. The ownership of Miller's Diner has been transferred. All employees are to remain. No layoffs." "No closures," Lena's eyes widened. "Transferred to who?" Mr. Miller pointed to the bottom of the page, Ethan Cole. She stared at the name, her heart racing. She didn't understand. She'd only met him once, and she had no idea that for the first time in years, a billionaire had made a decision not with logic or profit, but with feeling. Because for one brief moment, a waitress had looked at him like he wasn't broken, and that, to a man like Ethan Cole, was worth everything. Lena didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the scene in her head, the quiet stranger at the corner booth, the way he'd hesitated before taking her food, the strange stillness in his eyes when he looked at her. It had felt different. But never in her wildest thoughts did she imagine that man would buy the entire diner overnight. When she arrived for her shift the next morning, the entire place felt strange. Too clean, too quiet, like the air itself had changed. The usual hum of conversation was replaced by murmurs of speculation. A few of the regulars were whispering about it over coffee. "Did you hear? Some big shot bought the place. Yeah, they say he's loaded, a billionaire or something. Probably going to tear it down and build a bank." Lena tied her apron, forcing a polite smile. "Morning, everyone." Mr. Miller came out from the back room holding a clipboard, his eyes darting nervously toward the front door. "Morning, Lena. You, might want to stay close today. The new owner's coming by." Her hand froze mid-tie. "He's coming here? Today?" He nodded. "Said he wants to meet the staff. Should be any minute now." Before she could reply, the familiar sound of the bell over the door broke through the murmurs. Every head turned. Ethan Cole stepped inside. He looked different this time, composed, deliberate, untouchable again. His dark gray suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. The exhaustion she'd seen before was hidden behind the kind of calm that only money and power could buy. But his eyes found hers almost instantly, and for just a fraction of a second, that calm cracked. "Good morning," he said, voice measured. "I believe you're Mr. Miller." Miller stammered a greeting, shaking his hand. Ethan glanced briefly around the diner, his gaze sweeping over the mismatched tables, the scuffed floor, the flickering neon sign by the window. Then it returned to her. "Lena, right?" The sound of her name on his lips startled her. "Yes, sir," she said, standing straighter. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough for the silence to draw everyone's attention. "You served me yesterday," she nodded. "You looked like you needed coffee." That almost smile appeared again. "I did." Mr. Miller cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, we're all a little surprised, to be honest. We didn't expect, well, any of this." Ethan's voice softened slightly. "You run a good place. It deserves a chance to survive." The staff exchanged confused looks. Billionaires didn't save small diners. They didn't buy failing restaurants just to keep them open. But he said it so simply, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. He turned back to Lena. "You said something yesterday. About every day being a chance to start over." Her brow furrowed. "I did." He nodded, almost to himself. "I think I needed to hear that." Lena smiled, unsure what to say. "Then I'm glad you came in." For a brief second, something passed between them, something neither of them could name, a quiet current of recognition, as if both had been holding their breath for too long and suddenly found air again. When Ethan finally looked away, he spoke to Miller in that calm, executive tone again. "I'll be making some renovations. A few changes to the menu, marketing, repairs, but everyone stays. No one loses their job." A wave of relief passed through the room. After the meeting, Lena brought him a coffee, black, just as before. She placed it on the table and hesitated. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You bought this place just to help us?" He studied her face, his tone careful. "Let's just say I owed someone a meal." Her lips parted slightly, caught between gratitude and disbelief. "You didn't owe me anything." He looked out the window. "You're wrong about that." For the next few days, he returned every morning. Not as a customer now, but as the owner, reviewing papers, meeting with contractors, speaking with Miller about repairs. But Lena noticed something else. He'd always end up at the same booth, the corner one by the window, the same spot where she'd first seen him, alone, quiet, unreadable, and though he tried to hide it, she could see he was watching her. Every time she passed by with a tray of coffee cups or plates, his gaze would linger just long enough to betray his control. There was no arrogance in it, only curiosity, and something almost human underneath the surface of his restraint. One evening, as she was closing, he lingered longer than usual. The rain had returned, a soft rhythm against the windows. Lena was stacking chairs when he spoke from the corner booth. "You work late," she smiled faintly. "The place doesn't clean itself." He leaned back slightly, fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "You like it here." "I do," she said. "It's honest work. Feels real." He looked up, his expression softening in a way she hadn't seen before. "You don't see much of that anymore. Maybe you're not looking in the right places." He stared at her for a long moment. Maybe not. There was something about the way he said it, quiet, almost wistful, that made her heart tighten. She hesitated before speaking again. "You know, yesterday when you said the diner deserved to survive. Yes, I think maybe you did too." He froze, eyes meeting hers. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him like that, not as the billionaire, not as the man everyone feared in boardrooms, but as someone who might still be capable of being saved. And for a long, fragile second, neither of them moved. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, the lights flickered. When she finally turned away to grab her coat, he whispered, more to himself than to her, "You have no idea what that means." But she heard it. And in that dimly lit diner, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of rain, something irreversible began, something neither of them could stop, even if they wanted to. Ethan Cole had built empires with less hesitation than he now felt walking into that diner each morning. The man who once commanded boardrooms with surgical precision was suddenly pausing at the door of a small-town cafe, drawn not by profit or power, but by the quiet presence of a woman who somehow made him forget both. He told himself it was coincidence, habit, maybe curiosity. But deep down he knew it wasn't. It was something else, something far more dangerous. Lena noticed the change too. The once impenetrable man who had walked in like a storm now lingered like morning sunlight. He greeted her with a nod, sometimes even a faint smile. He stayed longer, asked questions about her life, and once, when the power flickered during a summer storm, he stayed to help her mop up water near the door. That night, when the diner emptied and the last neon light buzzed against the rain-soaked glass, she found him sitting in the same booth, staring into his untouched coffee. "You don't like it?" she asked softly. He looked up. "I like the silence." She leaned against the counter, drying her hands on a towel. Most people hate silence. They drown it with noise. His gaze lingered on her. Maybe that's why they never hear themselves think. Something about the way he said it carried weight, like a man who'd spent years avoiding his own thoughts. Lena tilted her head. "Is that what you're doing here? Thinking?" He gave a faint smile. "Trying." A long silence stretched between them, warm but fragile. She took a seat across from him, the first time she'd ever done so. "And what do you think about?" He studied her face before answering. "Regret." The word hung in the air. She didn't pry. She just nodded, her voice gentle. "We all have some of that." He looked down at his hands. "Not like mine." There it was again, that glimpse of something deeper, something broken behind the composed exterior. As the days passed, the walls he'd built began to crack in subtle ways. He started showing up before opening hours, offering to carry in boxes of supplies or fix small things around the diner. When she laughed, he found himself watching, memorizing the sound. When she spoke, he listened like it was something sacred. And yet, he still kept a distance, a deliberate line drawn between them that neither dared to cross. One morning, she brought him his usual coffee, but this time she added a note under the cup, just a few words written on a napkin. "Don't forget to live, not just exist." He didn't say anything when he read it, but the next day when she came in, she found a small vase of white lilies on the counter, her favorite. No note, just the flowers. Miller noticed the exchange and raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's just a customer, Lena?" She smiled faintly. "I don't think he knows what he is anymore." Ethan, meanwhile, found himself thinking about her at the strangest times. during board meetings, in his car at night when the city lights blurred outside his window. Her voice, her quiet conviction, her honesty, it haunted him in the gentlest way. His assistant, Mark, noticed the distraction. "You've been different lately." Ethan didn't look up from his papers. "Different how?" "You're smiling." "That's new." He didn't deny it. Later that week, Lena's car broke down after her shift. The parking lot was dark, the night air thick with mist. She was trying to fix it when his car pulled up, the low hum of an expensive engine cutting through the quiet. He stepped out, dressed in a charcoal coat, the rain catching the edge of his collar. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She looked up, surprised. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I was driving by," she smiled. "You live 2 towns over." He paused. "I was driving by." There was no point in arguing. He took off his jacket and crouched beside the car, examining the engine like a man completely out of his element. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, laughing softly. "Not a clue," he admitted, returning the smile. They ended up calling a tow truck, waiting together under the streetlight. The rain came in thin waves, and for a long time neither spoke. "You don't owe me anything," she said suddenly. He glanced at her. "Who said I did? The diner, the repairs, the flowers, it's too much, it's not enough." His voice was quiet, but it cut straight through her. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, for the first time, she saw him truly vulnerable. No armor, no walls, just a man who looked utterly lost. "Because you reminded me what kindness feels like," he said, "and I don't know what to do with that." Her breath caught. The rain softened, almost listening. "You don't have to do anything," she whispered. "Just don't run from it." He looked at her then, really looked, as if memorizing her face in that dim light. "You make it sound easy. It's not, but it's worth it." The tow truck arrived, breaking the moment. He offered her a ride home. She hesitated, then nodded. As they drove through the quiet streets, she caught his reflection in the window, the tension in his jaw, the weight in his eyes. He wasn't the man she'd met weeks ago, and maybe he wasn't sure who he was anymore. When he stopped in front of her apartment, she turned to thank him, but he spoke first. "Lena," he said softly, her name almost a confession. "You have no idea how much you've changed things." Her hand lingered on the door handle. "Maybe that's what happens when you finally let someone see you." For a long second, he said nothing. His gaze held hers, intense and unguarded. Then she stepped out into the rain. He watched her go, every instinct telling him to follow, but he didn't. Not yet. The night closed in around him, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole didn't want to go home. The following week, Ethan didn't show up at the diner. Not once. At first, Lena told herself it didn't matter. He was just a customer. A complicated, intriguing, impossible to forget customer. But as the days passed and his corner booth stayed empty, something began to ache quietly inside her. She tried to drown it in work. More coffee pots, more late-night shifts, more pretending not to check the window every time a sleek car passed by. Miller noticed. "You waiting for your fancy friend?" She rolled her eyes, pouring him a refill. "He's probably back in the city. People like him don't stay long in towns like this." Miller leaned back. "Maybe he found what he was looking for and left. Or maybe he didn't find it at all," she said softly, almost to herself. That night she stayed late again. The diner was empty, save for the hum of the fridge and the rain drumming against the glass. She was wiping the counter when the doorbell chimed, a deep, familiar sound that made her heart stop. He was there. Soaked from the rain, suit unbuttoned, hair damp. Ethan Cole looked nothing like the composed billionaire she'd come to know. He looked exhausted, undone. "You're late," she said, trying to mask the relief in her voice. He gave a faint smile. "Traffic," she crossed her arms. "It's been a week." Bad traffic. That made her laugh. A real, full laugh that seemed to melt something between them. He took a seat in his usual booth. "Can I still get my coffee?" "You can," she said, walking over to pour it. "But it's on the house." "I'd rather pay," he murmured. "It makes it feel less personal." She set the cup down gently. Maybe personal isn't such a bad thing. He looked up, his eyes catching hers, sharp, tired and full of something unspoken. You don't know what personal means for me. Then show me, she said, her tone quiet but steady. That broke him. He leaned back, exhaling like someone who'd been holding his breath for years. When I was 24, I built my first company. It grew fast, too fast. I lost people I cared about because I thought success meant never needing anyone again. His voice dropped. Then I lost my wife. She left because she said I didn't feel anything anymore. And she was right. Lena stood still, her hands trembling slightly. He continued, "Since then I've built walls high enough to keep the world out, and yet, somehow, you walked right in." She didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was soft, trembling. "I didn't mean to. I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "That's why I can't stop thinking about you." The rain outside grew heavier, as if mirroring the storm between them. Lena took a slow breath. "Ethan, I'm not someone you can just—" "Lena," he interrupted, his tone sincere. "I don't want anything from you. Not pity, not forgiveness, not even understanding. I just don't want this to end without telling you that." Her chest tightened. "Then why does it feel like you're already leaving again?" He looked down. "Because I might be." Her heart sank. "Why?" "My board wants me in London next week. There's a merger, a big one. It's what I've been working toward for years. I can't just walk away." She nodded slowly, the silence between them thick with everything they couldn't say. "Then maybe it's better if you go." He looked up sharply. "You mean that?" She smiled sadly. "No, but it's what people like us have to say." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering in his eyes. "People like us? People who live in different worlds," she replied. "Yours is built on steel and glass. Mine's built on coffee and tips. You don't belong here, Ethan, not really." He rose from his seat, closing the distance between them. "Maybe I don't belong anywhere." The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter, a small folded check. She frowned. "What's this?" "Repayment. For that day you gave your lunch to a stranger." She opened it and froze. The amount written was enough to buy the diner twice over. "Ethan, this is insane," she whispered. "I can't take this." "You already did," he said softly. "That day. You didn't know who I was and you didn't care. You just saw someone hungry. That's not something I can ever repay, but it's all I know how to do." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want your money." "I never did," he nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I had to give it." She folded the check back and handed it to him. "Then give it to someone who needs it." Their hands brushed, and for a second it was like time paused. Her pulse raced. His breath caught. He looked at her as though the world had stopped spinning, his expression breaking into something raw, something real. "You make it impossible to leave." She stepped back, whispering, "Then stay." But he didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the door, the sound of the rain swallowing his footsteps. Lena stood frozen, staring at the empty booth where he'd sat for weeks, a ghost of what could have been. Outside, Ethan stopped under the streetlight. The check still in his hand, now wet from the rain. He looked back at the diner window, her silhouette framed by soft yellow light. He wanted to go back. He almost did, but instead he unfolded the check, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall into the puddle at his feet. Then he got into his car and drove away, headlights fading into the dark, leaving behind the one person who had made him feel human again. Days turned into weeks, and the booth by the window stayed empty. Lena tried to convince herself that he was gone for good, that billionaires didn't belong in diners, and love stories like theirs didn't exist outside of movies. Yet every time she passed his old table, her hand brushed the edge as if tracing a memory she couldn't let go of. At night, when the cafe lights dimmed and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left, she caught herself thinking of him. His quiet smile, his careful words, the way he'd looked at her like she was the first person who'd ever really seen him. Then one evening, a black SUV stopped outside the diner. It wasn't him. It was a man in a suit, one of those sharp, silent types who carried authority in their posture. He walked straight to her counter and placed an envelope in front of her. "From Mr. Cole," he said. Her heart stuttered. "He's okay?" The man's expression softened. "He's in London." Asked me to deliver this personally. She took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. The man nodded once and left. Inside was a letter, handwritten, neat, precise. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the first line. Lena, I don't know if I'll ever deserve what you gave me. Not the meal, but the kindness. You changed the way I see everything. The merger is over now, but nothing feels like victory. It feels like loss. Her throat tightened as she read on. I told myself leaving was the right thing, that I was protecting you from the mess that is my life. But the truth is, I was running. You said not to run from kindness, and I did anyway. I'm sorry. She paused, her tears falling onto the paper. If I ever find the courage to come back, I hope you'll still be there. If not, thank you for reminding me what a heart sounds like when it's not made of stone. There was no signature, just a single pressed white lily taped at the bottom of the page. That night, Lena sat in the booth he'd once claimed, tracing the ink with her fingers. The rain outside matched her heartbeat, heavy, quiet, unrelenting. She didn't expect him to return, and yet somewhere deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Weeks later, the diner was unusually busy, a new crowd, tourists mostly, drawn by a glowing article that had appeared online. The Diner of Kindness, a waitress who changed a billionaire's life. The headline made her blush, but she didn't know who had written it. Miller showed her the piece on his phone. Says here the billionaire donated $10 million to community food programs, all under anonymity, he said, grinning. Sound like anyone you know? She didn't answer. But the next morning when she arrived at work, something felt different. The sign over the door, the one that had always flickered, was fixed, glowing, steady. And when she walked inside, there was a new smell in the air. Lilies, dozens of them. She froze. They were everywhere. On the counter, the tables, even her favorite coffee pot. And on the center table, a single folded note. Some things are worth coming back for. Her hand covered her mouth as tears welled again. The door opened behind her. She turned, and there he was, Ethan Cole, standing under the soft morning light, dressed in a simple gray suit, no tie, no armor. Just a man. I heard this place had good coffee, he said quietly. Her laugh broke through the tears. You could have just called. He took a slow step forward. I wasn't sure you'd answer. She shook her head, still smiling. You didn't have to buy the flowers. I didn't, he said softly. I bought the diner. She blinked, stunned. You what? He smiled faintly. Technically, it's yours. I just signed the papers. Ethan, I wanted you to have something that couldn't be taken away. Something permanent. She stared at him, speechless. Why would you do that? He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Because you gave me something permanent long before I earned it. Her voice broke. You didn't have to come back. I know, he said. But I wanted to. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, a silent understanding that this was no longer the same man who'd walked into her life months ago. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a small photograph. It was of the two of them, taken by Miller apparently, her laughing behind the counter, him trying not to. I kept this, he said, all through London. Reminded me of who I was when I was here. She touched the photo, her fingertips brushing his. And who are you now? He looked at her, really looked, with eyes that carried both exhaustion and peace. Someone trying to deserve the woman who gave him her lunch. Her heart caught. The diner seemed to fade away, the sounds, the lights, the world, until it was just them. You don't have to earn it, she whispered. You just have to stay. And for the first time he smiled. Not the polite, controlled smile of a man used to power, but a real one. A smile that said he finally understood. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then maybe I will. Behind them, the bell over the door chimed again. Customers coming in, life moving forward. But for that one suspended moment, everything stood still. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling light through the window onto their faces. Two people from different worlds who had finally found a place that belonged to both. And as Lena turned to pour him a cup of coffee, she smiled quietly to herself. This time, she knew he wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, the town woke to rumors, quiet. Curious ones whispered between tables and grocery aisles. The story of the billionaire who bought the diner for love spread faster than she could wipe the counter. Lena didn't care about the gossip. She only cared that when she turned the key at 6 a.m., Ethan was already there, sitting in his old booth with that same quiet expression. But this time, he looked at peace. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if the armor of wealth had been shed somewhere along the way. "You're early," she said, smiling as she filled his cup. He met her gaze. "I couldn't sleep. Jet lag." "Hope," he said softly. "It's worse than time zones," she laughed quietly. "Hope can be dangerous." He stirred his coffee, thoughtful. "So can loneliness." It was still early. No customers yet, just the hum of the lights and the faint smell of coffee grounds. She leaned on the counter, studying him. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come in that day?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Every day. So I think I would have kept driving. Straight past this town, past everything. And now?" He looked around the diner, his eyes catching the soft glow of the morning light. "Now I can't imagine driving anywhere else." She smiled but said nothing. Words weren't needed. Over the next few weeks, the diner changed, subtly, beautifully. Ethan never tried to take over. Instead, he helped quietly from the background. He replaced the broken stove, paid to fix the leaking roof, even had the neon sign outside fully restored. But every time Lena thanked him, he'd shrug it off. "It's your diner," he'd say. "I'm just a regular with a toolbox." Sometimes he'd stay long after closing, helping her count tips or mop the floor, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned. There was something profoundly human about seeing him there, a man who once moved millions, with a signature now wiping down tables in a small-town cafe. One evening, after the last customer left, she poured them both a cup of tea instead of coffee. "You know," she said, sitting across from him, "people around here think you're here for good." He looked up. "And you don't?" She hesitated. "I want to, but part of me still thinks one phone call could pull you back into that world." He studied her face. "That world doesn't feel like mine anymore." She smiled softly. "Then what does?" He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "This, the sound of cups, the smell of cinnamon, you telling me I've poured the coffee wrong." Her cheeks warmed. "I always pour too fast." He laughed, the kind of laugh that made his whole face change. "I know." There was silence then, a tender, unhurried kind that felt like home. But just as peace began to settle in, the outside world came knocking, literally. The bell over the door jingled and a tall woman stepped in. Sharp suit, sharp heels, sharp everything. The kind of woman who belonged to Ethan's old life, and she carried it like perfume. "Mr. Cole," she said crisply, ignoring Lena entirely. "We need to talk." Ethan's entire posture shifted. His back straightened, voice cooled. "Not here. This can't wait," she insisted, sliding a folder onto the counter. "Your name is still attached to the London deal. The board's expecting you to return for the expansion." Lena stepped back, her heart tightening. She didn't want to hear it, but she couldn't move. "I told them I'm done," he said flatly. The woman gave a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You done? Ethan, you built that empire. You can't just walk away for—" Her eyes flicked toward Lena, her tone dripping with disdain. "This." Lena's face flushed, but she stayed silent. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Watch your words," the woman smirked. "You think you can hide here pretending this is who you are. Sooner or later you'll come back. You always do." She left the folder on the counter and turned on her heel, the bell jingling as the door slammed shut behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena exhaled, forcing a smile. "Old friend?" He didn't look at her. "Old mistake." She tried to keep her tone light. She seemed persistent. He finally looked up. "That life doesn't want to let go." "Maybe it's not just that life," she said softly. "Maybe it's you who hasn't let go yet." The words hung between them like a fragile thread. He stood, pacing toward the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered in the dusk. "You think I'll leave again?" "I think part of you already has." He turned sharply. "That's not fair." "Maybe not. But it's honest." Her voice was steady, but her chest ached. "You told me once not to run from kindness. I'm asking you not to run from yourself." He stopped, her words striking something raw inside him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he walked toward her, his expression torn between anger and heartbreak. "You think I'm still that man, the one who only knows how to leave?" She met his gaze. "I think you're trying not to be." His breath trembled. "And if I fail?" "Then I'll forgive you," she said softly, "but don't make me watch you become someone you already left behind." He stared at her for a moment that felt eternal. Then quietly he whispered, "You deserve someone simpler." She smiled sadly. "I didn't fall for simple." The room went quiet again, the kind of silence that carried too much meaning to break. He didn't stay that night when she locked up. The booth where he'd sat looked different, not empty, just waiting, and as she turned off the lights, she couldn't help but wonder if love really was strong enough to keep someone from returning to the life they once built from stone. The diner felt different without him the next morning. Not empty. She refused to let it feel empty, but quieter in a way that pressed against her chest. His coffee cup sat on the counter, still in its place from the night before. She couldn't bring herself to wash it, Miller noticed. "He gone again?" Lena didn't answer. She just nodded, he sighed. "You know, some men are like the tide. They pull away to figure out where they belong. Doesn't mean they're not coming back." She forced a small smile. "And sometimes tides never return." She busied herself with work, greeting customers, taking orders, pretending not to glance at the window every time a car passed. By evening, the diner was half full, the smell of coffee and caramelized sugar hanging in the air. A little girl at one of the corner tables dropped her ice cream, and Lena rushed over, kneeling to comfort her. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get you another one," she said softly. The child sniffled. "Mommy says people who make messes cause trouble." Lena smiled gently. "Then I guess I cause a lot of trouble too," the girl giggled. Her mother smiled gratefully from across the booth. When Lena turned around, her breath caught. Ethan was standing by the door. He wasn't wearing the same tailored confidence he usually carried. His suit was slightly wrinkled, tie loose, eyes heavy, as if he'd been awake all night fighting battles she couldn't see. He waited until she approached, her expression unreadable. "You forgot your coffee cup," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I forgot a lot more than that." She crossed her arms. "You came back to fix things or to say goodbye?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet." "Then maybe start by sitting down." He followed her to a booth, not his usual one. He seemed unsure of his place now, and somehow that humility softened her heart. For a while, neither spoke. The hum of conversation around them filled the silence until Ethan finally said, "You were right. I haven't let go. I thought I could build a life on walls and numbers. But even now I catch myself trying to control everything. Even this." She met his gaze. "You can't control love, Ethan." "I know," he said, "and that terrifies me." Lena leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm, then let it. He looked down, his hands tightening on the table. "The board offered me everything I ever wanted. Power, expansion, another company under my name. And I almost said yes. But when I thought about it, all I saw was this diner." She blinked. "This diner," he nodded. "You, the smell of cinnamon, the sound of your laugh, the way you told me to stop running. That's all I could think about." Her chest tightened, but she didn't speak. He exhaled. "I spent my life buying things, companies, art, influence, thinking ownership meant security. But when I bought this diner, it was the first time I realized you can't buy what matters." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "And what matters?" He met her eyes. "You..." For a moment, the world outside seemed to blur. The neon signs flickered, the chatter faded, and all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. But before she could speak, the bell over the door rang again. 2 men in suits walked in, not customers, but corporate. Ethan's past, finding its way back. They looked around, spotted him, and approached. "Mr. Cole," one said briskly, "we've been trying to reach you. The London partners are threatening to pull the deal unless you sign today." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I told them I'm not going back." The man's tone grew cold. "If you don't, you'll lose everything you've built." Ethan didn't blink. "Then maybe I don't need it anymore," the man scoffed. "You'd throw away an empire for this place." He glanced around the small diner, his expression dripping with disdain. "For a waitress?" Lena froze. The insult cut through the air like glass. Ethan rose, his expression hardening into the quiet strength she'd glimpsed before. The kind born not of arrogance, but conviction. "She's not a waitress," he said evenly. "She's the only person who ever told me the truth. The only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth saving." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward them. The man scoffed again. "You're making a mistake." Ethan took a slow step closer. "I've made plenty." "This won't be one of them." The two men exchanged a look and left, the door slamming shut behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena stood motionless, her eyes searching his. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He turned toward her, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "Yes, I did. I've spent my life doing what was expected. For once, I want to do what's right." Her heart ached. "Ethan!" He took her hands, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what comes next. I don't even know who I am without that world. But I know one thing. I don't want to find out without you." She stared at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Are you sure? Because if you stay, this is real life. It's not boardrooms and jets and headlines. It's bills and tired mornings and burnt coffee." He smiled softly. "Then I guess it's about time I learned what real life feels like." For the first time since he'd walked into that diner months ago, Lena saw not the billionaire, not the myth, but the man. And when he leaned forward, brushing his lips against her forehead, she didn't pull away. Outside, the rain began to fall again, but this time it didn't sound like loss. It sounded like beginning. And for the first time, Lena stopped wondering whether he'd stay. She already knew. The days that followed were nothing short of surreal. The billionaire who once bought empires now showed up every morning with his sleeves rolled up, learning how to pour coffee without spilling it and how to take orders without forgetting them. At first, the regulars didn't know what to make of it. Some whispered, some chuckled, but most just watched curious as Ethan Cole traded his penthouse view for a cracked diner floor and a paper apron. Lena, however, never mocked him. She watched in quiet amusement as he stumbled through the simple tasks that came so naturally to her. "You're holding the pot wrong again," she teased one morning. He frowned, looking at the carafe like it was a hostile business partner. "I fail to see how this requires more skill than closing a multi-million-dollar deal." "Try not burning your fingers for once," she said. Taking it from him and demonstrating, he smiled at her patience. The kind that never belittled him. The kind he'd never been shown before. As the days went on, the small-town rhythm began to rewrite him. He started greeting customers by name. He began to laugh, real laughter, not the polite kind reserved for shareholders. And sometimes, when Lena wasn't looking, he'd just stand by the window, staring out at the street, as if realizing that for the first time in years, he wasn't running toward anything. But even in peace, the past had a way of lingering. One afternoon, Lena walked into the storage room to find him standing still. His phone in his hand, his expression dark. The screen glowed with messages from his old life, unread emails, missed calls, endless reminders of the empire he'd walked away from. He locked the phone and looked up at her. "You can answer it," she said softly. "I don't want to." "You built all of that," she reminded him. "It's part of who you are." He shook his head. "No, it's part of who I was. I built something that made me powerful but not happy. And I don't think I realized that until I met you." Her chest tightened. "Ethan!" He reached out and touched her wrist gently, almost as if afraid she'd pull away. "When I first came here, I thought kindness was weakness. You proved me wrong." Before she could answer, the bell above the door rang. Miller called from the counter. "Lena, we've got company." When they stepped out, the diner fell into a hush. A woman stood at the door, elegant, composed, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that only came from privilege. She was in her early 30s, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp. "Ethan," she said simply. Lena's heart sank. "Clara," Ethan said, straightening unconsciously. His voice held something between guilt and disbelief. Lena felt her stomach twist. He hadn't mentioned her, not once. Clara approached, ignoring everyone else. "You disappeared. Do you have any idea what kind of chaos that caused? The board thought you were dead." "I told them I was done," he said quietly. She scoffed. "Done, Ethan? You're not a man who walks away. You're a man who wins." "I'm not interested in winning anymore." She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of his answer. "So this is it? You're hiding in some roadside diner with—" Her eyes flicked to Lena, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, her?" Lena froze, every instinct telling her to step back. But she didn't. She held her ground, her chin high, though her heart pounded painfully in her chest. Ethan's tone hardened. "Her name is Lena." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You've lost your mind." He shook his head slowly. "No, I think I've finally found it." The diner stayed silent, the tension thick enough to feel. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're going to regret this. When she leaves, and she will, you'll realize what you threw away: power, legacy, control, everything you were born for." Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe I was born for something else." Clara's expression cracked, just for a moment. Then she turned sharply and walked out. The door shut behind her with a metallic ring that echoed long after she was gone. Lena stared at him, her voice trembling. "You didn't tell me about her." "I didn't think it mattered anymore," he said honestly. "She was part of that world. The one I left behind." She crossed her arms, hurt flashing behind her calm. "It matters to me," he exhaled slowly. "You're right. I should have told you." There was no anger in her tone, only quiet disappointment. "If we're going to be in the same world, Ethan, it has to be honest. Otherwise, it's just another deal." He nodded. "Then no more secrets." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena turned and walked toward the counter, her steps slow but steady. Miller cleared his throat. "You know, she'll forgive you if you let her see you're serious." Ethan nodded. "I intend to." The next morning, when Lena opened the diner, she froze. The booths were filled, not with customers, but with flowers. Not extravagant arrangements, not corporate displays. Simple wildflowers, the kind that grew by the edge of the road. Each vase held a note written in Ethan's handwriting. For every word I didn't say, for every truth I hid, for every reason I ran. And one final note, left on the counter: "Meet me where it all began." Her breath caught. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds, spilling gold across the street. She grabbed her jacket and stepped into the light, heart racing, unsure of what waited for her, but certain of one thing: something was about to change forever. The road led her just outside of town, where the hills rolled lazily toward the horizon. The air was still damp from the morning rain, carrying the scent of grass and earth. And there, at the top of a small rise, she saw him. Ethan Cole, the man who once owned skyscrapers, now standing beside a wooden fence, holding a paper cup of coffee like it was the most valuable thing in the world. He turned when he heard her steps. For the first time, there was no trace of the corporate armor he used to wear. No suit, no watch worth more than most people's homes. Just a man in a simple shirt and rolled sleeves, the wind tugging at his hair. "You found the notes," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I did," she replied, standing a few feet away. "You're lucky I didn't think it was some elaborate prank." His smile was faint. "You're the only person I know who would call honesty a prank." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You said no more secrets. So tell me, why here?" He looked over the hills before answering. "Because this is where I first stopped. That day, when I had nothing left to prove and nowhere to go. I sat right here in my car and thought about turning around. Going back to the city, back to who I was. But then you came out of that diner, with your lunch in a brown paper bag, and offered half of it to me." Her lips parted slightly. "You remember that?" He nodded. "Every detail. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care. You just saw someone hungry and decided to share what you had." She looked down for a moment, trying to hide the emotion rising in her chest. "I didn't think it mattered." "It mattered to me," he said quietly. "It was the first time in years someone did something for me without expecting anything in return." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed through the grass. A bird called from somewhere far off. It felt like the world had slowed just for them. Finally, she said, "You could have told me sooner." "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if you knew, it would ruin what we had. That you'd see me as the man I used to be, not the one I'm trying to become." Lena met his gaze, her eyes filled with both understanding and quiet hurt. "I never needed you to be anyone else, Ethan. I just needed you to be real." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth of his presence. "And if I told you I'm ready to be real now?" "Then you'll have to prove it," she said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "Then let me start here." She hesitated, taking it from him carefully. The handwriting was neat but unsteady, her own name written in a way that made her throat tighten. She opened it, and inside was a check. Her heart sank. "Ethan, if you think you can—" "Look closer," he interrupted gently. She did. And then she realized it wasn't a check for her. It was a deed. "To the diner," she whispered, her hands trembling. He nodded. "It's yours now, completely." The bank, the property, all of it. I've transferred everything to your name." Her eyes filled with disbelief. "Why?" "Because it was never mine to begin with," he said. "I bought it out of guilt, out of habit, because I didn't know how else to feel connected to something pure. But you taught me what real ownership looks like. It's not about control, it's about care." She took a deep breath, struggling to hold back tears. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," he said simply. "You gave me back my humanity, Lena. The least I can do is give you back your dream." For a moment she just stood there, staring at the deed. The paper blurred as tears filled her eyes. She blinked them away, looking at him, really looking, and saw a man stripped of all pretense. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," she whispered. "You were supposed to buy the place, fire everyone, and disappear." He smiled faintly. "Guess I made a bad investment." A soft laugh escaped her, broken by the emotion she could no longer hide. "You have no idea." The tension between them softened. He stepped closer again, his voice low, sincere. "There's one more thing I want to give you." "What?" He hesitated. "Time, if you'll have it. I don't want to leave again, Lena. I don't want to keep running from what I feel." She held his gaze, the pain, the disbelief, the hope all colliding in her chest. "And what is it that you feel?" He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling just slightly. "Something I haven't felt in years. Something I don't want to lose again." For a long, fragile second, neither moved. The space between them was charged, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Lena whispered, "Oh, you're impossible." "And you're extraordinary," he replied. Her eyes closed briefly as if trying to steady her heart. When she opened them again, the walls she'd built were cracking, just enough for the light to get through. But before she could answer, a voice called from down the road. It was Miller, waving a newspaper. "Lena, you won't believe this. Your story's in the papers. They're saying the billionaire vanished from the boardroom and turned up in a diner." Ethan winced. She turned to him, her smile faint but knowing. "Looks like the world found you again." He sighed. "Then I guess I'll have to decide if I'm still part of it." She looked at him carefully. "You can't hide forever, Ethan. Not from them." "And not from me." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time I stop hiding." Her hand brushed his lightly. "Whatever you do, just don't disappear again." "I won't," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and rose. They stood there together, two lives that never should have crossed, now bound by something neither could name yet both understood. And somewhere between the silence and the fading light, Lena knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the wide windows of the diner, glinting off the polished coffee pots and worn counter. The smell of pancakes and roasted beans filled the air, the same as it always had. But everything felt different. The sign above the door now read, "Lena's Place." For the first time it truly was. She moved between tables, taking orders with her usual calm warmth. Yet every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart reacted before her mind did. A small flutter of hope, a quiet ache that hadn't faded since the day on the hill. Ethan hadn't been back. Not since giving her the deed. She told herself it was fine. He'd done enough. He'd changed her life. And maybe in some strange way, she'd changed his. But part of her couldn't help wondering if the man who once had everything would ever allow himself to stay where nothing could be bought. Then, one quiet evening, when the last customer left and the diner fell into silence, the door opened again. He stood there, and not in a suit, not in the armor of his old world, but in a simple grey sweater, his eyes softer, his expression uncertain. "You're late for dinner," she said, trying to hide her smile. He stepped inside, his gaze moving around the familiar space. "I wasn't sure if I'd still be welcome." "That depends," she said, walking toward him. "Are you here as Ethan Cole, the billionaire, or as Ethan, the man who still owes me an explanation?" He met her halfway, his voice low. "Just Ethan, the man who realized that all his wealth meant nothing until someone taught him how to be kind again." Her eyes softened. "And did he ever tell her thank you?" He nodded slowly. Every day since she gave him her lunch, for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of memories, forgiveness, and something new that neither dared name yet. She broke it with a whisper. "You could have chosen anywhere to start over. I did, he said. I chose here. He looked around, at the counter where she'd first served him coffee, at the corner booth where he used to sit alone, at the life she'd built with her own 2 hands. You gave me something no one ever has. A reason to come back. Lena took a deep breath, her hand brushing the counter as if grounding herself. You don't owe me anything, Ethan. Not love, not gratitude, not... I know, he interrupted gently. That's why it means something. She looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. So what now? He smiled faintly. Now I stay. If you'll let me. The words hit her like sunlight after a long winter. Simple, unpolished, true. She stepped closer, close enough to see the flicker of nervousness behind his confidence. And what would you even do in a small-town diner? He grinned. Burn the coffee. Overcook the eggs. Get in your way. Learn how to live. Lena laughed, really laughed, and for a moment he just watched her, amazed by how alive her laughter felt. You're impossible, she said softly. He reached out, brushing a curl from her face, his voice a whisper. Maybe, but I'm yours if you'll have me. Her heart stilled. The world, once too loud, too cruel, suddenly quieted around them. She searched his face, the man who had once been untouchable, now standing in front of her with nothing left to hide. She smiled, tender and sure. Then I guess you'd better grab an apron. Outside, the sun dipped low, bathing the diner in gold. He followed her behind the counter, awkward and endearing as he tried to help, while she guided him, laughing softly every time he got it wrong. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole was learning how to live for something other than profit. And Lena was realizing that kindness, when given freely, could transform even the coldest heart. Later that night, when the lights were off and the sign glowed faintly in the window, he looked at her across the quiet room. You know, he said, the first time I came here I didn't even taste the food. I was too angry, too lost. Now I can't imagine a life without this place. Or without you. She smiled, eyes glimmering in the dim light. Then I'd say you finally found what you were hungry for. He leaned closer, and the air between them tightened with all that had been left unsaid for too long. Lena, yes? I never thought a letter, a meal, or a smile could change a life. But you did all 3. Her breath caught, tears warming her lashes. Then don't waste it. Stay changed. He nodded, his hand finding hers. I intend to. They stood together in the soft hum of the night. 2 lives once divided by wealth and circumstance, now bound by something far deeper. Love born not of grandeur but of grace. The diner clock ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its low rumble fading into quiet peace. And as the stars filled the sky above them, Ethan kissed her, not with urgency, but with the calm certainty of a man who had finally come home, their silhouettes framed against the window, her yellow dress catching the last glint of neon. His reflection, faint but steady beside her, told a story words could never fully hold, and for anyone passing by that night, Lena's place didn't look like just a diner anymore. It looked like the heart of something eternal. Proof that compassion could rebuild what ambition had broken, that love beyond money could still change the course of a life. Subscribe if you still believe that kindness has the power to transform even the richest hearts.